In 2009, a video game for the PlayStation 3 appeared on store shelves. Nobody knew what it was, the company that made it wasn't very well known, but what we really didn't know was that this little RPG about killing demons would be the start of perhaps one of the most influential video game franchises we've ever seen. That little game is called Demon's Souls, the first game in the Soulsborne franchise. Soulsborne consists of 7 games, also often considered 7 of the hardest video games of all time. We have Demon's Souls, Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, and the newest release that has taken the world by storm, Elden Ring. Now technically, only 3 of these are in their own series, but the games developed by the Japanese company From Software that follow the pattern of fuck around and find out are often lumped into one franchise, with the name Soulsborne, a merge of Dark Souls and Bloodborne, being given by fans. You could also call it Soulsborne Ring to include Elden Ring, or Soulsborne Ring Shadows Die Twice to include Sekiro, but I really like just calling it something simple. These games usually follow an unnamed character sent to hunt down and kill kings, demons, samurai, and the occasional god. And with the long-anticipated release of Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree, there could never be a better time to play through all the Soulsborne games. Now before we begin, I must say, I have played Elden Ring and Dark Souls 3 before, but the title sounded nicer. Demon's Souls was released on February 5th, 2009 for the PlayStation 3, with a full-blown remake made by Bluepoint Games being released alongside the PlayStation 5 at launch, which I'll be playing. The game follows your customized character finding themselves in a mysterious place called the Nexus, where you are recruited by a strange blind woman to go hunt down and kill about 16 demons to become powerful enough to kill Old King Allant, our final boss-ish. The game and its bosses are split up into 5 regions, each with vastly different environments. A crumbling kingdom, a mining facility, a prison, a stormy mountain, and the goddamn poisonous swamp. Hate that place. After you conquer your first level of the game, you are free to explore any area you'd like, even if you're way too weak for the enemies you're about to encounter. To be completely honest, this game was super easy once I beat my first few bosses. Now that doesn't mean the game is bad, far from it. I had an amazing time playing. I just wish that it was more of a challenge than it actually was. When your final boss is beaten by some chump who can't dodge an attack to save his life, I think it's a bit too easy. Something that I thought would make the game harder actually made it easier too. This game allows you to heal your character through consumables known as moongrasses. Early game, these are given to you like trick-or-treaters are given razor blades in their candy, very frequently. But towards the middle of the game, they are very scarce and can only be found on a few specific enemies. But towards the end of the game, these might as well be just infinite, because you're never running out. Another game mechanic comes in the form of, well, form. You have 2 different forms in this game, human and soul form. You start in human form, but once you die for the first time, you will be trapped in soul form till you use a special stone or kill a boss. Being in soul form causes your health to be cut in half, but there's a magical ring you can find early in the game that causes you to have 3/4 of your health rather than a half. Using the cling ring alongside just leveling health more, and being in your soul form doesn't really matter much. Now let's talk about bosses. For every game, I'm going to give you guys the opinion on my favorite and least favorite bosses. For my favorite boss of this game, I'm going to give it to Old King Allant. Sure, he's easy, but he's very fun to fight and has a killer soundtrack. I just wish he had more than like 5 moves. For the worst boss, I'm going to give it to the Old Monk. According to my friend Jacob, who will be playing these games at the same time as me, this boss is supposed to be another fight between you and an actual person playing the game. But you need to be in online mode for that, and in order to be in online mode, you need PlayStation Plus. And for the actual version of this boss to be locked behind a paywall, it's not a very good look. Also, the offline version, which is just an NPC fight, is easy as hell. I got hit once by a magic attack that did like 20 damage. Now on to my final thoughts and ranking of the game. For difficulty, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. It's still a game that somebody who's never played a Souls game would find hard, but it's still just not very hard. Overall, I'm going to give Demon's Souls a B tier. I think the game is great, but the lack of difficulty and the mediocre bosses doesn't really make it feel like your typical Souls game. I mean, It was the first one, but, you know. Dark Souls was released on October 4th, 2011 for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. The game was also remastered in 2018 for the Xbox One, PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, and PC. Now, who's ready for probably the most controversial take of the entire video? I don't think Dark Souls 1 is very good. Now listen, don't click off the video, let me explain. In Dark Souls, and this plot mostly goes the same for all three games, you play as an undead warrior who ventures through the land to sacrifice himself to Link the First Flame and prolong the Age of Fire, to basically keep the world alive. It's a heroic story about self-sacrifice and kicking ass. And although I don't know too much about the lore, I do really like it, especially when it comes to DS3, but we'll get to that when we get there. Now, onto the gameplay. Everything is just so damn clunky and dated. Yeah, I'm sure in 2011 this was revolutionary, but nowadays we have games like the Demon's Souls remake showing us how great these older games can look when new developers give them love. It just upsets me so much that something with this rich of a story is still being told in a game that looks and feels like a blown up cinder block. This game needs a remake so badly. It really deserves it. This game has some really good bosses and areas that I would love to explore in a game that isn't entirely made of the colors brown and gray. And now that I've brought up the bosses, let's talk about them. The level of quality in the bosses is all over the place. Now, I've watched videos about what bosses people like, and my opinions could not be any more different. Let's start with what is usually the third boss people face, the Bell Gargoyles. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Gank Fights. Gank fights consist of 2 or more bosses ganging up on one player, and this fight is the poster child for this concept. In the beginning of the battle, you start with one gargoyle slamming his axe trying to kill you in a nice difficult fight, but as soon as you get our boy down to half health, his brother swoops down and will not stop spitting fire on you until you are a medium rare New York strip with a side of cinnamon butter rolls. So when the second guard comes down, if you are not in a good spot, you will get cornered. There is no running away, because if you try, they'll probably both rain fire on your ass. Now, Kairop, the gargoyles are supposed to teach you to dodge better and to punish when you actually have the chance. No, just stop. I don't want to hear your stupid explanation on why this boss is actually the greatest thing the world has ever given us. I hate gank fights, and this one isn't done well. Getting good is not going to stop the second guard from spawning. Nobody bats an eye on this fight, and yet everybody loses their mind at the valiant gargoyles from Elden Ring. Now that I've ranted a bit, let me tell you about what I actually like in the game. Anne Orlando is pretty cool, except for these archers. They can go stick their huge arrows up their ass. Ornstein and Smo are another gank fight in the game, but I feel like a lot more thought went into this fight than other gank fights that I'm done talking about. Although I really didn't get to fight them too much. I accidentally summoned a dude to fight ONS with me, thinking he was an NPC summon, and he kinda kicked their asses. But I can still see why everybody likes that boss. Plus the music is good. I have a soft spot for good music. One more thing that I wanted to mention before I wrap up the DS1 discussion. I've heard from lots of people that the second half of the game, after ONS, is worse than the first half. And to that I say, do you really like the half of the game that has Blighttown in it? The second half for me was when I started seeing good things about the game. I liked a lot of the puzzles in the areas leading up to the 4 Lord Soul fights, and most of the bosses had good qualities to them. Even the 4 Kings, a gank fight done right, as the 4 bosses spawn in one at a time, but on a timer. So if you aren't fast enough, you might get pummeled. Now before I do my favorite and least favorite bosses, I have to mention that I didn't fight every single boss in the game. There are many optional ones in the base game, and there's a whole DLC that I haven't even looked at yet. I'm gonna keep things simple and just rank things from the base game and what I've played. Okay, for my favorite boss, I'm gonna give it to our final boss, Lord Gwyn. You're fighting the first Lord of Cinder, who has been severely weakened after 1,000 years of guarding the flame, but is still the fastest paced fight in the game. If that doesn't sound like a fun ass fight, you might be a pretty miserable person. Also, I beat this guy on my first try, so that's pretty cool. Alright, for the worst boss in the game. Surprisingly, not the Bell Gargoyles. because somehow there's something worse. The Bed of Chaos is one of the later game bosses, holding one of the 4 Lord Souls needed to advance to Lord Gwyn. So you'd think they'd make a fun and difficult boss that people would love. No, they made a boss that takes only 1 hit to kill, and the hardest element of the fight is the crumbling floor. Okay, I'm sure people will love that. Thank God I'm not alone in that opinion. Okay, now that I'm done yelling at this game, it's time for the ranking. I'm gonna give the difficulty an 8 out of 10, but it would probably go down to a 7 if the game weren't showing its age so badly. Did I mention that you can only dodge in 4 directions? Yeah, that's a great idea. I hope it sticks. Now for the final ranking. I'm gonna give the original Dark Souls a C tier. I'm sorry, but in my opinion, this game was overhyped by a bunch of guys wearing nostalgia goggles. But if it does get that remake I believe it needs, I'm sure this will move up in the future. Now onto Dark Souls 2, where I hope there isn't a single gank fight in the entire game. What's that now? Dark Souls 2 was released on March 11th, 2014, with an updated Scholar of the First Sin edition being released a year later. The game follows almost the exact formula as DS1 does, although some things are better and some things are worse. The game kinda feels like DS1, with kinda better graphics, worse multiplayer, slower feeling combat, very mediocre bosses, a longer main game, a slower pace, and the biggest difference of all, the worst enemy placement the world has ever seen. This game loves its gank fights both inside and outside of boss fights. We'll talk about a very fun one later, but for now I'd like to turn our attention to the level New Man's Wharf, where there are so many enemies that two-shot you, often in groups, thrown at you before you even have a chance of exploring a cubic foot of this area. And this is an early game area too, so it's not like you can go around mowing these guys down like they're overgrown grass. No. They are 7-foot tall barbarian pirate things charging at you or shooting at you with the tracking of that Battlefield playing veteran. Alright, let's move on. Let's talk about the progression. I think this game is pretty straightforward till a point. You collect the souls of 4 main bosses, then make your way to a shrine that you most likely found exploring. Then you advance to the final stretch of the game, starting at Drangleic Castle. Then you venture down to the Shrine of Amana and the Undead Crypt to obtain the King Ring, a ring which will unlock special doors throughout the world. And hey, look, there's one of those doors right in this castle. You head down to the final area of the game, the Throne of Want, to fight the final boss, the Throne Watcher and Defender. After fighting for your life, you have done it. You have beat DS2. Where's the ending? Oh, my mistake. I forgot something. I gotta go get what's called the Giant's Kingship to unlock the actual final boss in the same room as the Watcher and Defender. To do this, I have to go to one of the first areas, through a King Ring door, and interact with this giant tree. Oh shit! I can't touch the thing for some reason because I don't have an Ashen Mist Heart. Shit, my bad. Let me go through another king door to Aldea's Keep, onto Dragon Eyrie, through there and to the Dragon Shrine, where you either have to fight or run past what has to be 50 some odd enemies to go talk to or kill a dragon to get the Ashen Mist Heart. Finally, alright, back to the Giant Tree, kill the Giant Lord, get the Giant's Kingship, and go back to the Throne of Want where we can fight the actual final boss, Nashandra, and actually beat the game. That little fetch quest made my day, and makes me love this game even more than I already do. God, how did anybody beat this game without the wiki? I'm dead serious. I had no idea what to do after the first fight in the Throne of Want. But apparently the Queen Nashandra NPC in the castle says to seek out the Dragon Shrine and the Giants. How was I supposed to know that an NPC actually told me something useful for once? Alright, I'm gonna talk about the bosses now. That should make me happy, right? Right? Okay, for my favorite boss, drumroll please, none of them. None of them are my favorite. They are all so mediocre. I can barely remember any of them, and as of writing, I just finished the game. I mean, if I really had to pick one, I'd go for the Lost Sinner. I think the gimmick of having to light up the boss room before entering, so the shitty lock-on system actually works, is kinda cool. Plus, the fight was a good challenge. What wasn't a good challenge is my least favorite boss, the Ruined Sentinels. Oh shit, Kyrops, Sentinels? There's 2 of them? No, Mr. Viewer, there's fucking 3 of these guys. Guys, if I don't stop thinking about DS2 right now, I might actually go insane. Difficulty gets a 7 just because of its clunk, otherwise it's one of the easier titles depending on your build. Low C tier, would play again if given $5. Bloodborne was released on March 24th, 2015, and follows a hunter. Hunter of what? Beasts. What are beasts? I don't know, man. Don't ask me. I don't know the lore. Also, before we get started with this game, I decided to play this one with my boy Jacob. If anyone has a problem with me playing with my Pookie, you can send all complaints to 23 Washington Place in New York City. Now, like I said, you play as a hunter who is contracted by this old dude in a wheelchair to go out and kill beasts in the city of Yarnum. But we soon find out that either we've been pulled into a nightmare or this is all some weird baby's dream. I'm not entirely sure what this game is about, even after watching the Vadi video, but that's just classic FromSoft, I guess. You really never know what the plot of these games are unless, number 1, you are incredibly smart and also have no life, or number 2, you watch hours upon hours of lore analysis. I don't got the time for that, so let's just start talking about something other than the plot. I think the combat is some of the most fun in the franchise. Combat revolves around the fact that everything is parryable if you shoot a hoe at the exact right time. That's right, your character is equipped with a melee weapon in one hand and a Glock in the other. Sadly, you can't just mow down people like it's downtown Chicago. Your gun barely does any damage and it's only there to give you a possible parry attack, where your enemy is staggered for a few seconds, giving you the opportunity to ram your hand through its chest. Another main key to Bloodborne combat is the damage system. When something hits you and takes half of your health because you don't know how to level vigor, your health bar turns yellow for a few seconds before taking the health away. If you beat the shit enough out of your attacker before the time is up, you can retrieve close to all of your health back, which is really good because this game is one of the 2 that decides to not have refillable health potions. But it's worse in this one than it is in Demon Souls. In that one, you had multiple tiers of Moongrass to revive your health a little bit or a lot. But in Bloodborne, unless there's something I didn't find, you just have 1 tier of Blood Vials. Now, that would be fine if the blood vials in Bloodborne weren't so damn rare. You find yourself going out to grind these vials multiple times a playthrough. Now, of course, I have to state again, I am bad at these games, so I'm sorry, mister, I could no-hit this game with my eyes closed. The last and probably most important change to combat in this one would be the introduction of trick weapons. These are your melee weapons, and they all have a fun quirk to them. I went with the Saw Cleaver, which can open and close, making it a short-range or mid-range weapon. There's also cool combos you can do with it to increase your damage by switching up your range in the middle of beating the shit out of that blood-starved beast over there. Now that I've talked about something that I really liked, let's talk about something that only pissed me off just a little bit. The multiplayer sucks booty cheeks. Now, like I've discussed before, I played most of this game with my boy Jacob, and towards the end of the game, we started to notice that almost every single boss we fought would start breaking. And not in a good way, like they would just stand there or something. The bosses would start to float around the arena, and you couldn't see if they were attacking or not. And attacks would come out of pure nothingness in the case of this guy. Now, I don't know if it was just due to connection issues or not, but I still think it was worth a mention. Now, onto the bosses talk. I found most of the bosses quite fun. I feel FromSoft finally went for quality over quantity in this entry. There were only 2 bosses that I genuinely didn't like, and you guessed it, one of them is a trio fight, but I had my little helper boy with me, so I didn't get angry at this one. My actual least favorite boss is another gank fight. Rom the Vacuous Spider is a giant-ass spider that you need to kill, but first, you need to beat up about 20 smaller spiders that he spawns around the room. And guess what? These little guys one-shot your ass. Or at least my ass. Not to mention that once you actually safely make it to the big man, he teleports away and respawns his little guys. So it wasn't a hard fight necessarily, it was just really long and annoying. Now my favorite boss is an entirely different species of boss. Literally, he's not a beast. Just yet. Father Gascoigne is found in the first area of the game, and was my first boss. And it teaches you the combat and health systems perfectly. You gotta learn quickly how to deal with this guy, and guess what? I didn't. This boss probably took me close to 50 tries over the course of 4 hours. And when I say I loved almost every single attempt, I mean it. I loved fighting this guy. His moveset was so fun to figure out how to dodge, and just when you thought you've learned his moves, he turns into a giant fast as hell beast. I'm not gonna lie, I never figured out how to actually fight his second phase. I just got lucky on an attempt. And let me tell you, once I beat this bastard, I was the happiest guy on earth. Mainly because I was finally past Dark Souls 2's bosses. For the game's difficulty, I'm gonna give it a solid 8.5 out of 10. This is a hard game, but it's also a fair game. You have the items at your disposal to absolutely evaporate your enemies. You just need to learn how to do it. Overall, I think I'm gonna give Bloodborne an A tier. I really enjoyed my time in Yharnam, and I plan to go back and kill a few beasts solo eventually. Dark Souls 3 was released on April 12th, 2016, and I'll just get it right out of the way. This is the best Dark Souls game. They perfected their craft with this one. I don't really understand why this is a hot take right now, but I guess the world has always just been an imperfect place. Now, before we get into the game itself, I just wanted to say that it's been years since I've played this thing. And even when I did, I was just following my friends, and they led me through the whole thing. So I didn't really remember much going through this now. Alright, now let me take you through the story of DS3. The fire, which keeps the world alive, is fading once again. And it's been due for a new kindling for a long time now. Nobody has wanted to rekindle the fire. Eventually, past kindlers titled the Lords of Cinder were resurrected, hoping that they would do their duty once again. They all refused. And now you are being sent to take the ashes of the lords by force, to kindle the flame once again. At least that's my understanding. This game is also one of the more linear installments, and I think it works to its advantage. Back in DS1 and 2, there were so many different areas, and the quality of them was all over the place. But in DS3, you have about 15 required areas to visit, and each one of them you can tell were made with care. Except for Fair and Keep, they were probably drunk while designing that one. I always found exploring the areas fun to do, when I'm not getting pummeled on, of course. The weapons available in DS3 go back to some of the ones found in the first two games. Sadly, there are no Bloodborne pistols to shoot Prince Lothric with, but there are some cool new weapons right at your fingertips. I found these twin blades in an early area, and they were good enough to get me through the game. I didn't need to switch weapons halfway through like some other games with the words Dark and Souls in them. Also, another good point to mention, this game is so well paced that I ended up blowing through the whole thing in just 2 days. Now, with that being said, this is one of the shorter ones, but that's nothing bad at all. I'm glad they didn't try to stretch out the length to make it more even to DS1 and 2. Sometimes less is more. Now, even though the game is shorter, it's still packed to the brim with bosses. And almost every single one of them are goddamn spectacular. Now, of course, in the other games, there were a fair share of memorable bosses, but every single one of these have stuck to my mind even after 2 months of being done with the game. Now, with that being said, there are 2 stinkers, but we'll talk about those in a bit. Apart from those, I actually found that I was loving to fight these bosses, especially towards the final stretch of the game after you kill your 3rd Lord of Cinder. The final 4 bosses of the main game are some of FromSoft's finest work. These are some of the hardest bosses I've faced so far, and I don't know how, but I enjoyed almost every second of me getting my ass kicked. These 4 bosses are genuinely the best bosses I've fought so far in this entire playthrough. They are just that good. Their designs, their movesets, their arenas, their music, everything is just so damn good. Now, speaking of bosses, I should probably talk about the stinkers. And there's only 2 in my opinion. The first one you come across pretty early in the game. The Curse-Rotted Greatwood is a gimmicky boss, where you need to hack away at his balls until he gets angry and breaks through the floor, to which you hack at his balls some more. Now, I'll admit, when he breaks through the floor, taking you with him, that's a pretty cool concept, but I just found this fight to be a bit clunky and just not that fun. Now, it's not the worst fight in all of Souls, but it's the 2nd worst fight in this game. Now, the worst fight in this game, and my least favorite boss, is gonna have to go to the Crystal Sage. This dude spams magic spells at you until you start wailing away at him. Then he just runs away and spawns in a bunch of clones. This is just a really boring fight that has you running all around his arena to slap the real sage before it runs away again. Now that covers my least favorite boss. What's my favorite? Now obviously it has to come from the final 4. I've been giving them so much praise. But who could it be? That's the thing. I don't know. My favorite boss in Dark Souls 3 is a tie between the last 2 bosses, the Twin Princes and Soul of Cinder. I really could not pick between the two. They are just so damn good. I'll talk about the princes first. Now this is technically a duo fight, considering there are 2 things to kill in this boss battle, but the way they handle it is so damn cool. The first phase has you fighting the older Prince Lorien, who has a really cool moveset that has him teleporting all around the room to try to get his hits in. Once he's defeated, the younger Prince Lothric comes down, heals him, and rides on his back for the second phase. Now the second phase is very similar to the first, with the addition of Lothric's magic spells, and the fact that whenever you defeat Lorien again, Lothric will be right there to bring him back. So what you need to do is either defeat Lorien and use the downtime to get hits in on Lothric, or get behind Lorien while he's still alive and beat up the child clinging to its back. I cannot express how much I love this fight. All I can do is tell you to play the game and experience it for yourself. Now it's time for our second half of the tie, Soul of Cinder, the final boss. This boss is just something else. Soul of Cinder is the guardian of the first flame, and is also, if I'm getting the lore right, he is the manifestation of every hero who linked the first flame before us. So in a sense, you're fighting yourself from DS1 and 2. His fight is so cool. Like, I know I keep saying that about all the DS3 bosses, but it's true. What is truly special about this boss is that he has 4 different weapons and styles he can fight with. He starts out with his straight sword, but further on in the fight can change to a curved sword, a spear, or he can go full sweat and bring out the magic build. After you bring Cinder's health all the way down, he plunges his sword down, encasing it in fire. His health bar regenerates and the second phase begins. In this phase, he uses his flame sword and some lightning spears to try to eviscerate you. And if you don't recognize these moves yet, the boss music starts shifting to a tune you might remember. You aren't fighting all the fire linkers anymore. You're just fighting the first, Gwyn, the first Lord of Cinder you fought all the way back in Dark Souls 1. I hope you can understand just how cool this is, and the fact that Dark Souls 3 is the end of Dark Souls makes this fight all that more impactful. Your final fight in the trilogy is your final fight from the beginning. And with my favorite bosses discussed, I think it's time to rate this game as a whole. For difficulty, I'll give this a 7.9. It's definitely one of the easier games from the franchise, but this is still a hard-ass game. But it's also a game that I would recommend everybody play, because apart from 2 mediocre bosses, this game is goddamn amazing. I'm gonna have to give it an S tier. I just love it so much, and I can't wait to pick it back up and play through the DLC. I've heard great things. Sekiro Shadows Die Twice was released on March 22nd, 2019. This game follows Wolf, a shinobi who wants to take revenge on a group of samurai who imprisoned him. Now, I don't really know much about this game, for reasons you will soon find out, but let me go over what I do know. First, and the most obvious, you don't get to customize your character, as this game follows an actual person with backstory rather than some undead rando that saves the world. Secondly, combat is the furthest thing from our typical hit and roll mechanics that we know. Here, we mainly block incoming attacks with our sword, occasionally slicing, while a meter fills up at the top of the screen. Once full, you will have the opportunity to one-shot whatever enemy you face, even bosses. But since that sounded too easy, most bosses have more than one life. But don't worry, so do you. That's right, in Sekiro, once you die, you have 2 choices. You can stay dead, or you can resurrect, giving you one more chance to kill whomever it is that took you down. Now, I think this concept is cool as hell, but to compensate for this, your starting health is pitiful, and leveling up in this game is kind of a drag. You need 4 of these prayer beads that you get from killing mini-bosses, or you just find in the world. I would have rather they stuck with a Souls-type system, but that's alright. Another new combat feature is built right into your arm. The Shinobi prosthetic is a device that can 1. Grapple you around the map, and 2. Do a bunch of cool shit like shoot shurikens. Now, those are some pretty cool features that this game has to offer. Too bad I never got to use them past the 4-hour mark. I booted up the funny Shinobi game one day to play some more, only to find out that my FPS were abysmal, and not a few seconds later, it spun this error code in my face. Now, I consulted the masses on the interwebs, but no matter what they told me to do, whether it be uninstalling and reinstalling, rebooting my PC, starting a new save, nothing worked. And to this day, still doesn't, so I don't really know what to do. Do I rate it based on the 4 hours I played? I obviously can't give boss ratings, I didn't beat them all. I'll just put it in this nice broken tier. But if it suddenly starts working again, I'll give you my official rating in the comments. Ladies and gentlemen, the final Soulsborne game. Elden Ring was released on February 22nd, 2022, and oh my god. FromSoft finally made the massive open world game that they've obviously wanted to make since DS1, and it's downright amazing. Let's start with an explanation of the lore, to the extent that I understand it. Alright, so there's this thing called the Greater Will, and they either created our world or just found it, but either way they blessed the lands between, which is our world, with the Elden Ring. And I'm gonna be honest, what the fuck is the Elden Ring? Like, I know it's a physical thing because we collect parts of it throughout the game, but it's never explained well enough for the average player to understand by playing the game. In Dark Souls, you pick up by the end that the first flame keeps the world alive, and you gotta keep it lit. But with Elden Ring, you gotta reunite the shattered Elden Ring and become Elden Lord for some reason. I'm still not sure why we have to do it, because the Elden Ring was shattered for a reason, right? So why bring it back together? I don't know. But even though I don't really understand the game's lore, and probably won't until I watch 70 hours of VaatiVidya, I love this game. For starters, the world design is amazing. Everything flows together amazingly, apart from some areas being really empty for some reason. It really feels like this world could exist in real life. I mean, it's not any world I'd like to live in, but whatever. One thing I really like is the fact that with all the items and buffs and shit in this game, you can make things as easy or as hard as you want. This game also introduces spirit summons, which are little guys you can call in once you enter a certain area or boss fight. Now, some people in the community believe that using summons is cheating, and those are probably the same people that think DS1 is the best game known to man and probably have a Firekeeper body pillow. Another way they made the game have a flexible difficulty is by the sheer amount of different builds that you can have. In the earlier games, you had multiple possible builds, but mostly everything came down to a strength, dex, or magic build. But in this game, they encourage you to mess around with a bunch of different weapons and skills. My personal choice of build is a bleed build, not because it makes the game a bit easier, because it looks sick as fuck. A really cool thing they added in this one are called Ashes of War. These are different skills that you can attach to your weapon to give it a different move, and sometimes a completely different scaling. These can also completely change what type of status effect your weapon gives to enemies, if any at all. There's also a bunch of buffs that you can give your character through Ashes of War, sorceries, and incantations. I never really bothered with any of these though. I just pushed through with my underleveled ass until I beat the boss eventually. Speaking of bosses, there are quite a few in this game. 165 to be exact. Now, don't take that as in there's 165 bosses that you need to kill before you can beat the game. There's actually only around 13 that you absolutely need to kill. The other 152 are either optional full-fledged bosses found around the land, or they are one of the tons of mini-dungeon bosses found all around. And no, before you ask, as of the day I upload this, I have not even tried Malenia yet. For those of you who don't know who Malenia is, she is an optional boss and is considered by many to be the hardest boss in all of Souls. So yeah, now it's time I talk about my most and least favorite bosses. My favorite boss is one of the last you encounter. He stands at a reasonable 15 feet tall, has a broken axe for a weapon, and a giant lion on his back. Give it up for Godfrey. Yeah, I really got no reason for this boss to be my favorite, other than the fact that he's just insanely cool. So cool, in fact, that in his second phase, he drops all weapons and armor, and now will beat you to death with his bare fists. Very cool if you ask me. I also noticed something while playing this game. The boss arena that holds Godfrey and Morgott earlier in the game is the Elden Throne. So we can assume that this is where the Elden Lord and his companions sit down and rule, right? And the only way of getting to the throne room is up this bridge through this room. This room has a site of grace inside that's called the Queen's Bedchamber. So are you telling me whenever people need to talk to the Elden Lord, they need to pass through the Queen's bedroom first? This is a complete invasion of privacy. Also, if that's the bed, that looks uncomfortable as hell. You telling me the lands between got blood magic, but nobody invented a Tempur-Pedic mattress? Come on, man. Now you might be wondering, okay, Godfrey's your favorite, who's your least favorite? I'm not gonna tell you, because if there's anybody out there that hasn't played Elden Ring, I want to keep this a surprise. But if you have played the game, I'm sure this music still gives you nightmares too. Now I think it's time I end this. I'll give Elden Ring's difficulty a 7.5 just for the amount of ways you can make the game easier, but of course it's still not easy, not by a long shot. And for overall ranking, it's another S, baby! I just love the shit out of this game. It's my favorite of all the Soulsborne games, and it's currently one of my favorite games, period. I personally believe that if you have the money and a computer or console, give this game a shot, and as soon as you finish it, pick up the DLC. This shit looks amazing, and you bet your ass I'm going to be playing it as soon as it releases on Steam. Alright, and that was every single Soulsborne game. I really hoped you liked this video, and if you disagree with my ratings, that's alright. That's why they're mine. I look forward to playing all of these games again at some point to go through their DLCs, and just to replay them in general. I liked playing all of these. There were just some that I liked less. And that's all I gotta say. I'll see you guys in the next one, whenever the hell that might be.